November 1944. Somewhere in the dense forests of Belgium, the air thick with frost and the smell of pine. American infantrymen huddled in their foxholes, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air, watching the tree line with exhausted eyes. They had been fighting for weeks, pushing through mud and snow, and their hands were so cold that pulling a pin on a grenade required conscious effort, fingers stiff and uncooperative. What these soldiers didn't know was that a simple battlefield modification, born from desperation and ingenuity, would transform their standard-issue explosive into something far more effective than anything the arsenals back home had designed. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how American soldiers discovered that the difference between survival and defeat sometimes came down to a handful of rusty nails and the willingness to improvise when regulations failed them. Private First Class Robert Mitchell from the 2nd Infantry Division sat in his foxhole, examining the Mark II fragmentation grenade in his hand. The pineapple-shaped weapon, officially designated as the Mark II hand grenade, weighed about 21 ounces and was filled with 2 ounces of flaked TNT. The serrated cast-iron body was designed to fragment upon detonation, sending shrapnel in all directions with a casualty radius of approximately 15 yards. At least, that was what the training manual said. Mitchell had thrown enough of these grenades in combat to know the truth was different. The reality, whispered among the men who actually used them, was that the Mark II was inconsistent at best. Sometimes the cast-iron body would break into large, irregular chunks that sailed harmlessly past enemy soldiers. Other times, the fragments would be too small to cause significant harm beyond a few yards. The theoretical effective radius existed only in the minds of ordnance engineers who had never crouched in a muddy hole while enemy soldiers advanced through the trees. Sergeant William Kowalski, a Polish immigrant from Detroit who had been fighting since North Africa, crawled over to Mitchell's position. His face was weathered beyond his 28 years, eyes carrying the weight of too many close calls and lost friends. In his hand, he carried something that looked like a grenade but different. The surface bristled with dozens of rusty nails, each about 3 inches long, carefully wrapped around the body with wire and friction tape. "See this?" Kowalski said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is what actually works." Mitchell stared at the modified weapon. It looked like something a child might make, crude and improvised, nothing like the standardized equipment they'd been issued. Yet Kowalski's expression was completely serious. "You wrap these nails around the body tight as you can," Kowalski explained. "When it goes off, you get hundreds of pieces flying instead of just the fragments from the casing. And here's the thing, the nails fly straight and true. They don't tumble like the iron fragments. Every single one becomes a projectile." The concept was elegantly simple, almost embarrassingly so. The standard Mark II relied entirely on the fragmentation of its cast-iron body, a process that was inherently unpredictable. The iron would break along lines of weakness in the metal, creating irregular shards of varying sizes and masses. These fragments would tumble through the air, losing velocity and accuracy. Many would be too small to penetrate winter clothing or equipment. Others would be large but few in number. But nails were different. Nails were uniform, aerodynamic, and numerous. Wrapped around a grenade, they created a controlled fragmentation pattern that the original designers had never achieved. When the explosive detonated, it would propel these nails outward at tremendous velocity, each one flying straight like a tiny spear. The rusty ones were even better. Soldiers claimed the rust caused worse wounds, though whether this was true or simply battlefield mythology, no one could say for certain. "Where did you learn this?" Mitchell asked, taking the modified grenade carefully. "Italian campaign," Kowalski replied. "Old-timer from the 1st Division showed me. Said they figured it out in North Africa, when they realized the German stick grenades were more effective than ours. Those steel hand granite things might look weird, but they put shrapnel where it counts. So some smart boys started improvising." The irony was not lost on Mitchell. The American industrial machine, the most powerful manufacturing force in human history, produced grenades by the millions. Factories in Pennsylvania and Ohio ran 3 shifts, turning out weapons with precision and standardization that was the envy of the world. The United States could produce more grenades in a month than most countries could manufacture in a year. Yet here in the frozen forests of Belgium, soldiers were improving these weapons with scrap metal and wire scavenged from damaged buildings. By mid-November, word of the modification had spread through Mitchell's company like wildfire. Soldiers began collecting nails from abandoned farmhouses, damaged barns, and shattered villages. The longer nails were preferred, 3 to 4 inches being ideal. Shorter nails didn't have enough mass to remain effective at distance. Longer ones were harder to secure properly and might fall off during throwing. Corporal James Sullivan, a former carpenter from Oregon, became the unofficial expert in nail application technique. He demonstrated the proper method to anyone who would listen. Start with clean wire, wrap it in a spiral pattern around the grenade body, insert the nails point outward between the wraps, then secure everything with friction tape or more wire. The nails should be packed densely, but not so tight that they interfered with the explosion's expansion. You want maybe 60 to 80 nails, Sullivan explained to a group of new replacements who watched with wide eyes. More than that, and you're just adding weight. Less and you're not getting the full benefit. And make sure they're distributed evenly. If one side is heavier, the grenade will fly crooked when you throw it. The first real test came during a German counter-offensive near a small village whose name none of them could pronounce. Mitchell's platoon was dug in along a tree line when they spotted movement. German infantry advancing through the morning fog, their grey-green uniforms barely visible against the winter landscape. The Americans held their fire, waiting until the enemy soldiers were within grenade range. Lieutenant Edward Harrison, a young officer from Virginia who still believed in doing things by the book, had initially forbidden the nail modification. He considered it a violation of regulations and potentially dangerous. But when the German soldiers came within 40 yards, Harrison found himself reaching for one of the modified grenades that Kowalski had quietly prepared for him. The lieutenant pulled the pin and threw. The grenade arced through the cold air, trailing a thin stream of fog, where it disturbed the moisture-laden atmosphere. It landed among a group of 5 German soldiers who had taken cover behind a fallen tree. The detonation was unremarkable, the same sharp crack they'd heard hundreds of times before, but the effect was dramatically different. All 5 German soldiers went down immediately. One moment they had been moving, preparing to advance, and the next they were on the ground, struck by multiple nails that had flown outward in a devastating pattern. The soldier who had been furthest from the blast, perhaps 12 yards away, had been hit in the leg and chest. With a standard grenade, he almost certainly would have escaped unharmed. Harrison stared at the result, his face pale. "How many did you make?" he asked Kowalski quietly. "Enough," the sergeant replied, "and I can make more." By the end of that engagement, the American platoon had used 18 modified grenades and 6 standard ones. The difference in effectiveness was impossible to ignore. The modified versions seemed to clear defensive positions that standard grenades would have merely suppressed. Enemy soldiers who might have survived fragments from cast iron found themselves facing dozens of nail projectiles, each one capable of penetrating flesh and bone. Word spread beyond Mitchell's company. Within 2 weeks, soldiers across the division were modifying their grenades. Some units developed slight variations. A few experimented with ball bearings scrounged from damaged vehicles. Others tried different wrapping patterns. But the basic concept remained the same: enhance the fragmentation with uniform metal pieces that would fly true. The modification came with risks. Private Danny O'Connor from Boston learned this the hard way when a poorly secured nail fell loose as he pulled the pin. The nail caught on his jacket, and in his panic, he nearly dropped the armed grenade in his own foxhole. Only Kowalski's quick reflexes, grabbing the grenade and throwing it forward, prevented disaster. After that incident, Sullivan instituted a quality control process, inspecting each modified grenade before it was distributed. Not everyone was convinced. Captain Robert Jameson, the company commander, worried about liability and regulations. He had received no official authorization for this modification. If a soldier was injured by an improperly modified grenade, the responsibility would fall on him. Yet he also couldn't ignore the results. His men were more effective with the modified weapons. In a war where effectiveness meant survival, That was hard to argue against. The debate resolved itself in early December, when Major General Harold Thompson visited the front lines. The general was known for his practical approach to warfare, a quality that had earned him respect among the enlisted men who usually had little patience for high-ranking officers. When Kowalski demonstrated the modification, Thompson listened carefully, asked pointed questions about safety and effectiveness, and then nodded slowly. "How many nails does it take per grenade?" Thompson asked. "About 70, sir, depending on the size," Kowalski replied. 3-inch nails work best." Thompson did some mental calculation. The division uses approximately 5,000 grenades per month in active combat. That would require 350,000 nails. He paused, then smiled slightly. "Fortunately, Belgium has plenty of abandoned buildings. Carry on, Sergeant. But I want a written procedure for the modification. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it safely." The general's approval changed everything. What had been a battlefield improvisation became semi-official practice. Sullivan wrote out detailed instructions, which were mimeographed and distributed to squad leaders. Supply sergeants began specifically requesting nails in their requisitions, listed under miscellaneous materials. Some enterprising quartermaster officers even arranged for nails to be sent from rear-area supply depots, though this was never officially documented. Private Mitchell became something of a specialist in the modification technique. He found that rusty nails, while popular among the men for superstitious reasons, weren't actually better than clean ones. The rust might cause infection in wounds, but in the immediate tactical situation, a clean nail that flew straight was just as effective. What mattered was uniformity, nails of the same length and weight distributed evenly around the grenade body. The psychological impact on enemy soldiers was significant. German troops who had survived previous encounters with American grenades found that the modified versions were far more dangerous. The increased effective radius meant that soldiers who had previously considered themselves safe at certain distances now found themselves at greater risk. This forced German infantry to spread out more when advancing, which made them easier to engage with rifle fire. Lieutenant Hans Weber, a German officer captured in late December, spoke candidly during his interrogation. His testimony was recorded by intelligence officers who were trying to assess the effectiveness of various American weapons. "Your new grenades are very concerning," Weber said in accented but clear English. "Before, we knew that if we were more than 10 meters from the explosion, we had a good chance. Now soldiers are being struck at 15 or 20 meters. It forces us to take cover more carefully, which slows our movements. Your soldiers seem to have many of these improved weapons." The interrogator, Captain Daniel Foster, asked if the German forces had considered similar modifications. Weber shook his head. "Our stick grenades have a different design. The explosive is in the head with a wooden handle. Wrapping nails around the head would change the balance too much, making them difficult to throw accurately, and our grenades' effectiveness comes from the blast wave in enclosed spaces, not fragmentation in open areas. Your pineapple grenades are designed differently, so the modification makes sense for your weapon." This insight revealed an interesting truth. The nail modification only worked because of the Mark II's specific design. The grenade's weight, shape, and throwing characteristics meant that adding nails didn't significantly impact its use. A German stick grenade, with its center of mass in the head and the leverage provided by the wooden handle, would have become unbalanced and difficult to throw if similarly modified. By January 1945, the modification had spread across multiple American divisions. Soldiers in the Ardennes, fighting through the desperate days of the German offensive that would later be called the Battle of the Bulge, found the modified grenades particularly valuable in clearing buildings and bunkers. The increased fragment count meant that even soldiers hiding behind partial cover were at risk. Sergeant Thomas DiMaggio, a squad leader from the 9th Infantry Division, kept a journal throughout the campaign. His entries from January provide vivid descriptions of the modified grenades in action. "January 8th, he wrote, cleared 3 houses today. Used 4 modified grenades and 2 standard ones. The difference is like night and day. The nail grenades clear rooms that standard ones would just stun. Jerry has started staying further back from doors and windows because he knows what's coming. That hesitation gives us the edge we need." Not all modifications were successful. Some soldiers tried to create super grenades, with over 100 nails, thinking more was better. These weapons were too heavy to throw effectively, and sometimes the excessive mass prevented proper fragmentation. The explosion would push the nail bundle outward as a cluster, rather than dispersing individual nails, defeating the entire purpose. Others experimented with different materials. Corporal Vincent Russo tried wrapping a grenade with barbed wire, thinking the jagged metal would cause devastating wounds. Instead, the wire tended to fragment unpredictably, creating a few large pieces rather than many small ones. Ball bearings worked well, but were harder to secure than nails and tended to roll off the grenade body if not properly anchored. The optimal modification, soldiers discovered through trial and error, remained the original. 60 to 83-inch nails wrapped tightly with wire, secured with friction tape, distributed evenly around the grenade body. This created a weapon that was easy to throw, reliable in detonation, and dramatically more effective than the standard issue version. By the time American forces crossed the Rhine in March 1945, the modification was so widespread that new replacement soldiers arriving from the United States were surprised to find that combat troops routinely altered their grenades. The practice had become part of the institutional knowledge passed from veteran to replacement, a skill as fundamental as maintaining a rifle or digging a proper foxhole. Private Robert Chen, a Chinese-American soldier from California, arrived at the front in March and received instruction on the modification from his squad leader. "Back in training, they never mentioned this," Chen said, watching as another soldier demonstrated the wrapping technique. His squad leader, a tired corporal from Michigan, laughed without humor. "There's a lot they don't mention in training. The Army teaches you the official way. We teach you the way that keeps you alive. Sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes they're not." The modification represented something deeper than just improved weapons. It demonstrated the American soldiers' capacity for innovation and adaptation. The United States military in World War II was often characterized by its overwhelming material superiority. More tanks, more planes, more ships, more of everything. But the nail modification showed that American soldiers were also capable of creative problem-solving when their issued equipment fell short. This contrasted with the more rigid military culture of their opponents. German forces, while tactically skilled and often equipped with excellent weapons, were less likely to modify standard equipment without authorization. The hierarchical structure of the German military discouraged individual initiative in matters of equipment modification. An American sergeant could decide to modify grenades and spread the technique through his company with minimal oversight. A German sergeant attempting the same would likely face disciplinary action for deviating from established procedure. As the war in Europe moved into its final months, the modified grenades became so common that some soldiers couldn't remember what the standard version looked like. Private Mitchell, who had first learned the technique in November, found himself in April demonstrating it to newly arrived replacement soldiers who had never thrown a grenade in combat. "The official grenade is smooth," Mitchell explained, holding up a standard Mark II. "Like this. But we wrap it with nails because it makes it more effective. You'll want to make several before we move out tomorrow. The supply sergeant has nails set aside." The war in Europe ended in May 1945. As soldiers prepared to return home or redeploy to the Pacific, the question arose of what to do with thousands of modified grenades. Regulations technically prohibited the modification, even though it had been tacitly approved by field commanders up to division level. Major General Thompson, who had given his blessing to the practice back in December, made the practical decision. Modified grenades would be expended in training exercises or carefully disassembled. The nails would be removed, the grenades returned to standard configuration. There would be no official record of the modification, no reports to the Ordnance Department, no recommendations for changes in production. This decision meant that the nail modification would remain largely unknown outside those who had served in the European theater. Post-war analysis of grenade effectiveness focused on the standard Mark II design, with its documented but inconsistent performance. The dramatic improvement achieved by frontline soldiers with scrap nails and wire never made it into official after-action reports. Kowalski, who had first shown Mitchell the modification, returned to Detroit after the war. He rarely spoke about his combat experiences, but he kept a single modified grenade, carefully disarmed, as a memento. When his grandson asked about it years later, Kowalski explained the story. "The army gave us good equipment," he said, "better than what most other soldiers had, and certainly superior to what our adversaries could consistently provide. But sometimes good isn't good enough. Sometimes you need to make it better yourself, and sometimes the best ideas come from soldiers in foxholes, not engineers in laboratories." This sentiment captured the essence of the modification's significance. The United States had entered World War II with an industrial and technological advantage that would ultimately prove decisive. American factories outproduced those of all other nations combined. American logistics ensured that soldiers at the front received supplies in quantities that enemy forces could only dream of. American innovation produced radar, the proximity fuse, and eventually nuclear weapons. Yet with all this industrial might and scientific achievement, one of the most effective improvements to American infantry combat power came from soldiers wrapping rusty nails around grenades with wire and tape. It was a reminder that innovation isn't only about resources or technology. Sometimes it's about recognizing a problem and solving it with whatever materials are at hand. The modification also revealed something about the nature of effectiveness in combat. The Mark II grenade, as designed, met its specifications. It weighed the correct amount, had the proper fusing mechanism, and detonated reliably. By the metrics used in development and testing, it was a success. But those metrics didn't capture the reality of combat use, where inconsistent fragmentation meant the difference between suppressing an enemy position and actually clearing it. Soldiers didn't care about meeting specifications. They cared about survival and mission success. The nail modification improved both. It was effective because it solved the actual problem soldiers faced, not the theoretical problem that ordnance engineers had anticipated. Private Mitchell returned to civilian life in Iowa, where he eventually became a teacher. In his later years, when teaching history classes, he would sometimes mention the grenade modification as an example of practical innovation. His students, growing up in an era of increasingly sophisticated weapons, found it hard to believe that something as simple as wrapping nails around an explosive could make a significant difference. "But that's exactly the point," Mitchell would explain. "The most important innovations aren't always complicated. Sometimes they're elegant and simple. And sometimes the people closest to a problem are the best positioned to solve it, even if they're not the experts." The story of the nail modification survived primarily through oral history, veterans sharing their experiences with family, researchers, and historians. A few photographs exist showing modified grenades, though these were typically taken after the war when regulations had relaxed. During active combat, photographing modified equipment would have risked official censure. In the decades following the war, military historians occasionally mentioned the practice in footnotes or brief paragraphs. It never received the attention given to more glamorous innovations like the bazooka or the proximity fuse. Yet for the soldiers who used modified grenades in the forests of Belgium, the frozen fields of the Ardennes, and the rubble-strewn towns of Germany, it was as significant as any officially sanctioned technological advancement. The modification's legacy extended beyond its immediate tactical impact. It became part of the institutional knowledge of the American military, an example of adaptive innovation that would be referenced in later conflicts. In Vietnam, Korea, and subsequent wars, American soldiers would continue to modify equipment when official solutions fell short. This culture of practical innovation, of soldiers improving their own tools, became a characteristic of American military operations. Sullivan, the carpenter from Oregon who had become the expert in application technique, summed it up in a letter to his brother, written in April 1945. "The grenade they gave us was good. The grenade we made was better. That's all there is to it. When you're fighting for your life, you use what works, not what some manual says should work. And if you can make something work better with nails and wire, you do it. That's not disrespecting the equipment, that's respecting your own life and the lives of the men around you." The war ended with the modified grenades having saved countless American lives and contributed to the defeat of enemy forces across Europe. Yet no medals were awarded for the innovation. No commendations specifically mentioned it. The soldiers who developed and spread the technique received no special recognition beyond the satisfaction of knowing they had found a better way. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.